The next 3 videos in this series will focus on the 3 main greenhouse gases and how each of them are emitted in wastewater utilities. Although carbon dioxide is a major player in nearly every other sector, especially in the oil and gas sector, it's a little trickier to track within the context of wastewater. In fact, the majority of Scope 1 emissions from urban wastewater systems are methane and nitrous oxide, which are more potent than CO2, with global warming potentials of 25-fold and 265-fold respectively. Nitrous oxide emissions especially contribute up to 80% of the overall carbon footprint of a wastewater treatment plant. Thus, most studies only account for methane and nitrous oxide. They exclude carbon dioxide emissions that come from biological treatment processes, since they're generally derived from biogenic organic matter and human excreta or food waste, and should not be included in national total emissions, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 2019 guidelines for national greenhouse gas inventories. Biogenic compounds are organic molecules produced by living organisms like bacteria. Since the carbon dioxide that comes from these bacteria are not within water facilities' control, they qualify as Scope 3 emissions. However, assuming that all carbon emissions on wastewater treatment plants are biogenic is an outlook that can lead us to severely underestimating their magnitude and impact. In fact, one study finds that in wastewater treatment plants with different configurations, Scope 1 emissions account for 23 to 83% of the total carbon footprint, Scope 2 emissions contribute 14 to 68%, and Scope 3 emissions only make up about 1 to 13%. Let's discuss the specific sources of carbon dioxide emissions within the context of wastewater treatment plants, their relative amount, and steps that can be taken towards mitigating them. One of the main sources of carbon dioxide on wastewater treatment plants is energy consumption, mainly through electricity usage. This qualifies as an indirect Scope 2 emission source and can also be called operational emissions since they are generated from energy used on-site or off-site electricity production that is utilized by a facility. A 2021 study investigating operational energy use across 76 wastewater utilities in the United States estimated the total wastewater emissions associated with electricity, natural gas, and fuel consumption across the country to be 16.2 megatons of carbon dioxide. Out of this total, 88% of emissions came from electricity consumption, and 12% came from natural gas and fuel oil consumption. Also, wastewater treatment utilities typically exhibit greater spatial heterogeneity in energy sources and associated emissions compared to water utilities, due to heating requirements via natural gas and fuel oil for backup generators and pumping stations. The study also found that when all forms of energy are considered in treating wastewater, the average carbon footprint per volume of wastewater emissions is 0.38 kilograms of carbon dioxide per 1,000 liters. So, let's say you have an Olympic-sized swimming pool, which typically has a volume of 2.5 million liters, filled entirely with wastewater. From energy-related emissions alone, you would be emitting 950 kilograms of carbon dioxide to treat it all, approximately the weight of a baby whale. You might be wondering at this point, what is electricity used for in the first place in the context of wastewater treatment plants, and how can we reduce its impact on emissions? Most wastewater treatment operations consist of 2 parts. Solids are removed in the primary stage, and bacterial decomposition occurs in the secondary stage. Sometimes additional filtration is required as a tertiary stage. Now, in secondary treatment, dissolved and suspended biological matter are removed using microorganisms in a controlled environment. Most medium and large-sized wastewater treatment plants do this using an activated sludge system, where a high concentration of bacteria, protozoa, and fungi, called the activated sludge, are kept in suspension by stirring, and remove organic matter from the wastewater. An International Water Association study conducted in 2015 found that in facilities that use the system, aeration, which is when air is circulated through the wastewater to help the microorganisms biodegrade pollutants, accounts for 50 to 60% of all electricity consumption. In more recent years, this percentage has pushed 75%. Sludge treatment accounted for 15 to 25% of electricity usage. Additionally, secondary sedimentation, which occurs in the primary stage and involves large tanks equipped with rotating mechanical scum collectors as well as recirculation pumps, constitutes approximately 15% of the electricity consumption. When we think about reducing carbon dioxide emissions that come from electricity, we need to think about energy-saving alternative methods to employ. One innovative approach is the integration of microbial fuel cells, or MFCs, in the activated sludge process. MFCs are galvanic devices that use bacteria as catalysts to oxidize organic and inorganic materials and generate current. In activated sludge systems, aeration is the most energy-intensive part. This approach, alongside others like membrane-aerated biofilm reactors, requires more research and development to be truly successful, and will be discussed in greater depth in the last video of this series. In the context of wastewater treatment plants, carbon dioxide emissions from chemical usage and transportation constitute indirect factors that also warrant close attention. Research highlights their contribution to the overall carbon footprint, revealing nuances that demand consideration. A study in 2015 examining various municipal wastewater treatment plants in China found that carbon dioxide emissions arising from chemical consumption in sludge processes ranged from 0.07% to 0.18% of the total, while the transportation of these chemicals accounted for 0.1% to 0.4% of carbon dioxide emissions. Diverse chemicals are employed across different stages of wastewater treatment and sludge management. Inorganic agents such as aluminum sulfate, iron chloride, and lime facilitate biological phosphorus removal by inducing precipitation. While this supports treatment, it simultaneously leads to an increase in sludge volume, exacerbating carbon emissions during disposal and transportation. These agents also trigger upstream emissions, as raw materials are extracted and manufactured into inorganic chemical agents. Organic agents and polymers like polyacrylamide serve roles in flocculation, coagulation, and dewatering processes. Often synthesized in factories, these agents contribute to the carbon footprint due to their industrial origins. Cumulatively, current data from the EcoInvent database links inorganic agents with 1,964 kilograms CO2 equivalent per kilogram of wastewater and organic agents with 1,909 kilograms CO2 equivalent per kilogram of wastewater in terms of upstream and direct emissions. To provide perspective, let's go back to our Olympic swimming pool. Treating the volume of wastewater equivalent to an Olympic swimming pool can lead to around 9.68 megatons of carbon dioxide emissions from chemical usage alone. Minimizing these emissions demands a dual approach, reducing consumption and reevaluating the processes that necessitate chemical usage. Wastewater treatment through chemically induced flocculation increases chemical consumption and consequently carbon emissions. Additionally, the transportation of chemical agents upstream and byproducts of chemical treatment downstream, like grit, screenings, and sludge, magnifies indirect CO2 emissions. Addressing these concerns necessitates solutions beyond conventional means, such as exploring eco-friendly transport options like rail, or devising methods to shorten transportation distances. Promisingly, ongoing research aims to mitigate transport-related emissions by advocating for biofuels, like bioethanol sourced from sugar crops. Replacing fossil-origin gasoline with biofuels has the potential to reduce carbon emissions from wastewater treatment plants by at least 65%, according to the Renewable Energy Directive. As we delve deeper into these intricacies, solutions to minimize carbon dioxide emissions related to chemical usage in transportation come into focus, highlighting the significance of ongoing investigation and sustainable innovation in the wastewater treatment landscape. In conclusion, it is evident that wastewater treatment plants add to carbon dioxide emissions through various sources. Electricity consumption, with a significant portion being attributed to aeration systems and sludge treatment processes, is a major contributor. Other indirect emissions associated with chemical usage in transportation and treatment processes contribute to the carbon footprint of wastewater treatment plants. By urging climate guideline providers not to overlook or underestimate the significance of these emissions, we can foster a more comprehensive approach to tackle the carbon footprint of wastewater treatment and work towards a more sustainable future.